Welcome to Dark Deeds and Conspiracy, the podcast that unearths chilling true crimes and mind-bending conspiracies. Each episode, we explore a dark corner of history or a mystery that still haunts us today. Let's dive in.
You know that feeling, right? That little itch when you hear about something unexplained. A story pops up, something weird, and suddenly you just have to know more. You want to figure it out.
Yeah, you get hooked trying to unravel a real mystery.
Exactly. Well, if that's you, you're definitely in the right place today. We've pulled together some really interesting sources to do a deep dive into one of history's biggest puzzles.
We're talking about the disappearance of Flight 19.
And it's a pretty strong connection to the whole Bermuda Triangle legend.
Yeah, it's almost synonymous with it now. We're going to explore what happened back on December 5th, 1945. That's the day those 5 U.S. Navy Avenger torpedo bombers just vanished over the Atlantic.
Right.
Our main sources, they really lay out the timeline, what witnesses said, the different theories that have popped up over the years. Lots of detail in there.
Yeah, there really is. So our goal today, our mission, if you like, is to look past all the hype, focus on what the facts, the documented stuff actually tells us about Flight 19. We want to understand the events, sure, but also how this specific incident became like the cornerstone of the Bermuda Triangle myth.
And why we're still talking about it, still fascinated by it, decades later.
Absolutely. So the big question we're digging into for you today is, what really happened to those planes and the men on board? And why does the story still have such a grip on us?
Okay, so let's start with the basics, the core facts.
Lay it out for us.
December 5th, 1945. 5 U.S. Navy TBM Avenger torpedo bombers. They disappear over the Atlantic Ocean.
And this wasn't some secret mission or anything?
No, it was actually a routine training flight. It was called Navigation Problem Number 1. Standard procedure, planned route off the coast of Florida.
And these Avengers, they weren't small planes, right? These were pretty substantial aircraft.
Definitely. Workhorses from World War II. So 5 of them take off that day. Total of 14 airmen on board.
Okay.
The flight leader was Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor. They took off from Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale.
All sounds pretty normal so far, a training flight.
It should have been. But almost right after takeoff, things started going wrong.
How so?
Lieutenant Taylor started reporting problems with navigation. He thought his compasses weren't working right.
Okay, malfunctioning compasses.
Yeah.
What did he think was happening?
He radioed that he thought they were flying over the Florida Keys.
But they weren't.
Well, our sources strongly suggest they were probably much further east, likely over the Bahamas already.
Wow, okay. So that's a pretty big difference right from the start. A crucial misjudgment.
It seems like it. And as they got more lost, the radio contact with the base, it started to fade. Became intermittent, then eventually lost.
And they searched, obviously.
Oh, yeah. A huge search and rescue operation was launched. Massive effort. But nothing.
Nothing at all. No wreckage. Oh, bodies.
No confirmed wreckage from Flight 19 itself.
Yeah.
No trace of the 14 airmen. Ever.
Just vanished. 5 planes.
And that lack of physical evidence, that complete disappearance, is really key to why this whole thing became such an enduring mystery.
It's hard to wrap your head around 5 big planes just gone. But tragically, that wasn't the end of it for that day, was it?
Sadly, no. It got worse. A PBM Mariner flying boat.
That was one of the search planes.
Exactly. A big aircraft sent out specifically to look for Flight 19. It also disappeared.
Oh, no. How many people were on that one?
13 crew members also vanished.
So, another mystery. Or do we know more about what happened to the Mariner?
The situation with the Mariner seems a bit clearer, actually. More explainable, perhaps.
Okay.
There's a strong explanation, and it's backed up by a report from a ship that was in the area, the SS Gaines Mills.
What did they report?
They reported seeing a huge explosion, a fireball in the sky right around the time and place the Mariner went silent.
An explosion. So it blew up midair.
That's the widely accepted theory, yeah.
Yeah.
And our sources mentioned something, well, kind of notorious about those PBM Mariners.
What's that?
They apparently had a reputation. They are sometimes called flying gas tanks.
Flying gas tanks. What?
They were known to be prone to gas vapor explosions. It was a design vulnerability.
Wow. So the Flight 19 disappearance is wrapped in navigational mystery, but the rescue plane, that sounds more like a tragic technical accident.
It seems very likely, yes. So you add it all up, 27 men lost in total that day across 2 separate, though connected, incidents.
27. Just staggering.
Okay, so let's circle back to Flight 19 then, and Lieutenant Taylor. the flight leader. What do we know about him? His experience level?
Well, sources say Taylor was actually quite experienced as a pilot. Over 2,500 flight hours. He knew the Avenger aircraft well.
Okay, so not inexperienced then.
In general, no. But he was pretty new to the Fort Lauderdale area. He'd only recently transferred from Miami.
Ah, okay. So maybe not familiar with the local conditions or landmarks?
That's a possibility. And there's another detail. Apparently, there was a record of him getting lost before, during a mission in the Pacific.
Really? That's interesting. Adds another layer. And I think you mentioned something about the pre-flight situation, too. Yes. The sources mentioned he reportedly showed up late for the pre-flight briefing.
Okay.
And maybe more significantly, he apparently didn't bring his watch or his navigational kit with him.
Wait, no watch? On a navigation exercise where timing is critical? That seems odd.
It does seem like a potential issue, doesn't it? Especially for a flight focused entirely on navigating by time and heading.
Definitely. So they get airborne. He thinks the compasses are out.
Yeah.
What did the radio transmissions actually sound like?
They paint a picture of, well, growing confusion. Taylor kept saying both his compasses were out.
Both of them at the same time.
That's what he reported. And at one point, another pilot, maybe one of the students, is not entirely clear, actually suggested flying west.
West towards Florida, towards land.
Exactly. A logical suggestion if you think you're lost over the Atlantic off Florida.
But Taylor didn't go for it.
No, he overruled him. Taylor insisted on heading east, further out over the ocean.
Why east?
Because he was convinced, wrongly it seems, that they were actually somewhere over the Gulf of Mexico, south of Florida.
Gulf of Mexico. That's completely the wrong direction.
Completely. So, believing they were in the Gulf, he thought flying northeast would eventually bring them over Florida. But since they were likely already east of Florida...
Flying northeast just took them further out, deeper into the Atlantic.
Tragically, yes. Further and further away from any potential landfall.
And you have to remember the military context here, right? The other pilots. They couldn't just ignore the leader.
That's a really crucial point. Military protocol. You follow the flight leader's orders. Even if you have doubts, challenging your commander, especially in the air, it's a huge deal.
So they followed him east and then northeast, further out?
It appears so. And those last transmissions, they're quite chilling, honestly.
What did they say?
The messages became garbled, harder to understand. But phrases like, "It looks like we are entering whitewater," were reported.
Whitewater? Like breaking waves, suggesting they were low, maybe?
Possibly.
Yeah.
Or maybe just referring to rough seas. And then, clearly, we are completely lost.
Yes.
Yeah.
Heartbreaking.
And the final sort of coherent message picked up was apparently holding 270. That's west. We didn't go far enough east.
Wait, he wanted to go east again, even then.
The message continues. We may as well just turn around and go east again. You can almost hear the confusion, the desperation maybe.
Wow. It just sounds like utter chaos and disorientation in those final moments. Okay, so we have human error, navigational confusion. But what about other factors? The weather, the planes themselves.
Absolutely key factors. The weather especially. It started out as a decent day, clear skies.
But it didn't stay that way.
No. A cold front moved in pretty rapidly.
Yeah.
And with it came heavy rain, strong winds, really turbulent seas.
So visibility would have dropped dramatically.
Exactly, making visual navigation almost impossible. And those conditions would have also messed with the radio signals, making communication even harder.
So the bad weather compounded the navigation problems.
It definitely seems that way. And then there's the condition of the planes themselves.
Right. You said they were older from the war.
Yeah, these TBM Avengers were secondhand. They'd seen a lot of action in World War II. Tough planes, sure, but they had a lot of flight hours on them. Mechanical issues weren't unheard of.
And didn't the sources say something about Taylor's reluctance to fly that day?
They do mention that, yeah. That Taylor was reportedly reluctant to take the flight. The specific reasons aren't given, though. Could be anything, but it adds to the picture.
Okay, so let's put it all together. You've got a flight leader who's possibly disoriented, maybe unsure about his compasses, new to the area. Then you have rapidly worsening weather, making things even harder, plus older aircraft.
It really starts to sound like a perfect storm, doesn't it? A convergence of negative factors.
Even without needing, aliens or anything supernatural.
Exactly. And the most logical consequence of flying around, lost, of course, for hours in those conditions.
Running out of fuel.
Fuel exhaustion. Seems like the most probable primary reason they ultimately went down.
And if they did run out of fuel and had to ditch out in those seas, in the dark,
the chances of survival would have been incredibly slim. Avengers were heavy planes, trying to ditch successfully in a storm at night. It's grim to think about.
It paints a really tragic but ultimately understandable picture based on the evidence.
A plausible, if deeply unfortunate, sequence of events.
So, given this more rational explanation seems likely, how did Flight 19 get so tangled up with the whole Bermuda Triangle legend? That seems like the next big question.
It's a really interesting part of the story, and the first thing to realize is the term Bermuda Triangle. People weren't really using it back in 1945 when Flight 19 disappeared.
Really? So the event came before the name?
Pretty much, yeah. The whole Bermuda Triangle idea, as a concept, really started to take off later, mostly in the 1960s and 70s.
How did that happen?
Well, there's an article in 1964 by a writer named Vincent Gaddis that got some attention. But the really big boost came from books, especially Charles Berlitz's book, The Bermuda Triangle, in the mid-70s. That was a huge bestseller.
Ah, okay, so those writers started connecting Flight 19 to this zone.
Exactly. They took the Flight 19 incident and started linking it with other unexplained disappearances of ships and planes in that sort of general area, the rough triangle between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico.
And what other kinds of incidents got pulled into this Bermuda Triangle narrative?
Oh, quite a few. Our sources list some famous ones. The USS Cyclops, a Navy ship that vanished way back in 1918.
Wow, 1918.
Yeah. Then there were airliners like the Star Tiger and Star Ariel in the late 40s. Another flight, a Douglas DC-3 in 1948.
Okay.
Ships like the tanker Marine Sulphur Queen in 63, the old schooner Carol A. Deering found abandoned in 21, the SS Cotopaxi in 25. A whole collection of mysteries, basically.
So they gathered all these disparate events, some truly puzzling, some maybe less so under this one umbrella term.
That's pretty much how the legend grew. Each story added a bit more mystique to the region.
And the theories people came up with to explain all these things, I bet they got pretty wild.
Oh, absolutely. They ran the gamut. You had some that sounded, vaguely plausible, maybe?
Like what?
Things like weird magnetic anomalies messing with compasses, or sudden releases of methane gas from the seabed that could supposedly sink ships by changing water density, or just unusually severe storms and rogue waves.
Okay, those are at least based on some natural phenomena.
Right, but then you got into the really speculative stuff.
Let me guess. Aliens?
Aliens were definitely on the list. Alien abductions. Also, time portals or wormholes snatching vessels out of our dimension.
Right.
Energy crystals from the lost city of Atlantis, supposedly located down there, causing interference.
Atlantis energy crystals, okay.
And even USOs,
right.
Unidentified submerged objects, basically UFOs that operate underwater.
It's quite a journey from maybe the compass was off to underwater aliens took them?
It really is. But it makes for a compelling story, doesn't it?
It does. But what do our sources say about the actual frequency of disappearances there? Is it really statistically weird?
That's a key point. Modern analysis, looking at the data, it shows that the Bermuda Triangle doesn't actually have a significantly higher rate of disappearances than any other busy stretch of ocean.
So it's busy, lots of traffic, storms happen, accidents happen, just like anywhere else with similar conditions.
Pretty much. And many of those mysterious incidents that built the legend, a lot of them have quite mundane explanations when you dig into the details. Natural causes, mechanical failures, or, like we suspect with Flight 19, human error.
Okay, so let's tackle some of those more out there theories head on. Time warps, wormholes, any actual science behind that in this context?
Based on our sources, no. There's zero scientific evidence supporting the idea that time warps or wormholes exist in a way that could just swallow up ships and planes. It's pure science fiction territory.
Fun for movies, not so much for explaining real events.
Exactly.
What about Atlantis and those energy crystals?
Well, first, Atlantis itself is still considered a legend, a myth. There's no solid archaeological proof it existed as described, let alone that its ruins are under the triangle.
So no lost city.
And therefore, no powerful energy crystals causing havoc with modern technology. It's a cool idea, but again, no basis in fact according to the material we have.
Right. And the alien abduction theory, always popular.
Always captures the imagination. But same answer, really. Our sources are clear. There's just no credible evidence linking any of these disappearances to extraterrestrial activity. UFOs, USOs. It's all speculation, not supported by proof.
Okay, so let's put the sci-fi stuff aside. Back to the more grounded possibilities. Magnetic anomalies, you mentioned that. Is there anything to it?
There's a grain of truth, maybe. Our sources do say that minor magnetic fluctuations do occur naturally all over the planet. And specifically, the Florida coast area is known for having significant magnetic variation.
Variation meaning the difference between true north and where the compass needle points.
Exactly. Pilots have to know how to compensate for that. It's a standard part of navigation.
Yeah.
So is it possible that Taylor, being new to the area, misinterpreted this normal variation as a total compass failure?
That sounds plausible. It could have added to his confusion.
It certainly could have been a contributing factor to the disorientation. But the key thing scientists say is there are no known magnetic anomalies in the triangle powerful or consistent enough to make planes justif, vanish off the radar, or inexplicably crash. Not on that scale.
Okay, so a possible contributing factor to confusion, but not a magical plane-destroying force.
That seems to be the consensus.
What about rogue waves? You mentioned those two.
Yeah, rogue waves are real. We know that now. These are those unexpectedly massive waves that can form seemingly out of nowhere, even in generally stormy seas.
And they could sink a ship or break up a plane if it ditched.
Absolutely. They're incredibly powerful. So if Flight 19 did have to ditch in the rough seas that developed that day, encountering a rogue wave is a very plausible natural explanation for why the planes might have broken up quickly and why wreckage might be scattered or sunk deep.
That makes sense, especially given the storm conditions.
It fits the known environmental factors.
Now, what was the Navy's final official word on Flight 19? Did they stick with blaming Taylor?
Well, the initial Navy report, the Board of Inquiry right after it happened, did primarily blame Lieutenant Taylor's navigational errors, pointing to his confusion about their location.
What?
But that finding was later officially changed, amended to cause unknown.
Why the change?
Largely, it seems, out of consideration for Taylor's family and the lack of definitive physical proof, the missing wreckage. Without the planes, you can't be 100% certain what failed or exactly what decisions were made.
So officially, it's still cause unknown.
Officially, yes. Although it's generally understood that most investigators at the time and since believed it was likely a combination of things.
Like we've been discussing, Taylor's confusion, the compass issue interpretation, the weather, fuel exhaustion, all contributing.
Exactly. A cascade of failures and unfortunate circumstances rather than one single mysterious cause.
Right. It does feel like a most logical conclusion when you lay out all the evidence. Still, our sources mention some other intriguing little details, things that maybe keep the mystery alive.
For sure. Like the fact that this mission, navigation problem number 1, was considered so routine, almost basic. For that to go so catastrophically wrong, it seems disproportionate.
Yeah, it makes the failure seem even more stark. And the fuel, they had full tanks, right?
Yes, full tanks. Should have given them about 5 hours of flight time, which tells you they were up there, lost for a considerable amount of time before the fuel likely ran out.
5 hours is a long time to be lost over the ocean. And the mix of experience in the cruise.
That seems relevant, too. You had Taylor, experienced overall, but maybe not locally, and then several pilots with much less experience. Some were still students, under 300 flight hours.
So less likely to forcefully challenge the leader, perhaps, even if they suspected something was wrong?
It's certainly possible it made it harder for them to assert a different course of action, especially against a commanding officer who seemed certain, even if wrong.
There was also that theory you mentioned that they might have actually been close to Florida near the end.
Yeah, some researchers have mapped out possible flight paths based on the radio calls and fuel endurance. They suggest Flight 19 might have flown near Cape Canaveral or Daytona Beach.
But Taylor still thought they were in the Gulf.
Apparently so. If that research is correct, his persistent belief about being in the Gulf led him to order those eastward turns, taking them away from the coast, even when they might have been relatively close.
Oh, that's just agonizing to think about. A potential sunk cost fallacy situation, maybe.
Right.
Doubling down on the wrong course.
Could be. Continuing with the plan even when evidence suggests it's failing.
And the very last messages suggesting they were trying to ditch together.
Right. The transmissions indicated they tightened formation, likely preparing for a coordinated water landing once fuel was gone.
But again, those heavy Avengers, rough seas, darkness.
The controlled ditching would have been incredibly difficult. Keeping the planes afloat, getting rafts deployed, the odds were stacked against them.
And the biggest lingering question, the one that fuels the speculation, still no confirmed wreckage.
That's the big one, isn't it? Despite decades of searching, occasional finds of other sunken Avengers in the area, nothing has ever been conclusively identified as belonging to Flight 19. No matching serial numbers.
Why is it so hard to find anything out there?
Well, the ocean's huge, obviously. And the seabed in that part of the Atlantic can be dynamic. Shifting sands, currents, wreckage could be buried, moved, or just incredibly hard to spot. It doesn't mean it isn't there, just that finding it is a monumental challenge.
Makes sense. And just quickly, the sources had a bit more on the Mariner rescue plane explosion.
Yeah, the SS Gaines Mills report was quite specific. They saw a fireball about 100 feet high, burning for maybe 10 minutes, and they gave a specific location.
Pretty strong eyewitness evidence for an explosion.
Very strong. It really reinforces the idea that the Mariner's loss was separate, likely due to that flying gas tank vulnerability, and not directly related to whatever caused Flight 19's initial disappearance.
Okay. And briefly, those other triangle cases mentioned, like the USS Cyclops.
Yeah, the Cyclops is still a major naval mystery. 1918, over 300 people lost. Largest non-combat loss for the U.S. Navy. No distress call, weather supposedly okay, just gone. Theories include structural failure, maybe German U-boats, though unconfirmed, but ultimately, no wreckage, no answers.
A true mystery, and the Carol A. Deering, the ship found abandoned.
That one sounds more like a potential crime scene. Ghost ship found grounded, crew gone, lifeboats missing, logbook gone. Points towards something like mutiny or piracy, maybe even a storm hitting after abandonment. Very different from Flight 19.
And the Marine Sulphur Queen tanker.
That one seems more straightforwardly like a structural failure. Lost in 1963, some debris was found. Carrying molten sulfur is tricky. Theories center on the ship possibly breaking apart due to cargo issues or structural weakness.
Okay. And the SS Cotopaxi, the one they did eventually find.
Right. Vanished in 1925, wreckage finally identified in 2020. It just shows that even after almost a century, answers can sometimes surface, and it highlights how hard ocean searches are.
It really does. Our sources even touched on some, well, anecdotal survivor stories from the region. People claiming weird experiences.
Yeah, there are those accounts out there. People talking about unexplained time loss, instruments going haywire, weird fog, a general sense of unease.
Common themes in those stories.
Often, yes. Loss of time, things feeling off, maybe no clear sign of danger, but just strangeness?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting stories, for sure. But hard to verify, obviously. Memory and suggestion play tricks.
Need to take those with a grain of salt.
Definitely. Fascinating, but anecdotal.
Okay, so let's try to bring it all together. Based on everything we've dug into from these sources today, what's the most likely, the most evidence-based explanation for what happened to Flight 19?
When you strip away the speculation, the most compelling picture is, unfortunately, a tragic convergence of human error and harsh conditions.
Starting with Taylor's navigation?
It seems likely, yes. His initial navigational errors, possibly amplified by misinterpreting his compass readings due to local magnetic variation and his unfamiliarity with the area, seemed to be the catalyst. He got them off course.
And then the weather turned.
Right. The rapidly deteriorating weather piled on, reducing visibility, likely disrupting radio communication further, making it incredibly hard to fix their position or get clear instructions.
Which ultimately led to?
Fuel exhaustion.
Yeah.
Flying lost for hours, burning fuel, until they simply couldn't stay airborne any longer. Followed by an attempted ditching in terrible conditions where survival chances were minimal.
The human element really feels central here. Taylor's experience level, but maybe not in that specific context.
Exactly. His overall flight hours were high, but the specific challenges of that area may be combined with whatever made him reluctant to fly, or the pressure of being lost. It all likely played a role. We can't know his exact state of mind, of course, but the decisions reported seem to stem from significant confusion.
So, a terrible accident, born from a series of compounding problems. How did that story morph into a cornerstone of the Bermuda Triangle myth?
It really comes down to the lack of a neat, tidy ending. Because the planes were never found, because there was no definitive proof, it left a vacuum.
And speculation rushed in to fill the void.
Precisely. The unexplained is always more intriguing than a complex but understandable accident. Sensational writers and media then picked up on it, often exaggerating the mystery, downplaying the rational factors like the weather or the navigational errors.
Connecting it to those other disappearances.
Exactly. Weaving it into this larger tapestry of the Bermuda Triangle, this mysterious zone. It made for a much better story, commercially speaking.
Even though official bodies, like the Navy and Coast Guard, they don't recognize the triangle as being exceptionally dangerous.
Correct. They state clearly that the incident rate isn't abnormal for such a busy area. But the legend is powerful. That human desire for a narrative, for something more than just bad luck and mistakes, it keeps the myth alive.
So, Flight 19, a profound human tragedy, likely caused by a chain reaction of errors and bad luck, but ultimately captured by our fascination with the unknown and spun into a legend.
That sums it up pretty well. The lack of concrete answers allowed the mystery to overshadow the more probable, if less sensational, reality.
It's a powerful reminder of how stories take shape, isn't it? Especially when information is missing. Thanks so much for walking through all this with me.
My pleasure. It's a endlessly fascinating case.
It really is. And for you listening, maybe think about that. How often does a lack of complete information open the door for speculation, for compelling stories to be built, maybe even stories that aren't entirely accurate? Consider other times, in history or even just gossip, where the gaps in knowledge are filled by imagination, creating narratives that really take hold.
Thanks for listening to Dark Deeds and Conspiracy. If this story intrigued you, tap the like and subscribe buttons. It helps more than you know. Got a case you want us to cover? Drop it in the comments. New episodes posted on Tuesdays. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and never stop searching for the truth.